Hey, everybody, this is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club Live. If you are watching us on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe, comment, and like. Same with the podcast. We know a lot of you guys like to listen to these as podcasts. And on whatever service you're on, the ratings and reviews really do help. So we would appreciate you doing that as well. Today's episode is brought to you by our newest service called Next Placement, which is Career Club's people-centric, empathetic approach to helping companies transition employees. So if you haven't looked into Next Placement, please do at career.club. So with that, I'm very pleased to have our guest on today. He's a relatively new friend, but we spent a couple hours on the phone, and between his podcast and just his subject matter expertise, I know you're going to love him. So our guest today is Christopher Lind, and this is a pretty impressive background, so I'm just going to read a lot of this. Christopher is the VP and Chief Learning Officer at ChenMed. Christopher is a bold, digital-first learning and talent development leader who spent the majority of his career, I think this is cool, at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Christopher's also a podcast host. He's got a show called Learning Tech Talks, where he critically evaluates the latest in learning and workplace technology to close the gap between the companies that build the tech and the leaders and companies responsible for selecting, implementing, and managing it. So with that, Christopher, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure getting to know you more recently, and I'm looking forward to us actually capturing our conversation and recording it for the benefit of others. I can't complain about that.
No, we were teasing just a minute ago. I wish we had been pressing record the great conversations that we have, and you've got a ton of expertise and point of view to share with folks who are sort of grappling with everything. But before we launch into all that, as is our want, we've got just a handful of little icebreaker questions to help people get to know you a little bit better. So first question, where were you born and raised?
Ooh, all right. So there's two different answers.
The questions are going to get harder, just so you know.
Well, all right. Say I like this kind of stuff. So I was born in Loveland, Colorado. Okay. And so that's where I originated from, have the 522 social security number thing going on, and was there for a few years. But then my family moved to Minnesota. And so Minnesota is actually where I spent most of my youth growing up, in a very tiny town in the middle of Nowheresville.
There's a lot of that going on in Minnesota, isn't there?
You know what? There is. There's also a lot of lakes. So yeah, those two things Minnesota has plenty of.
And where did you go? Where'd you go to school, college?
So I went to Northwestern College. It's now called the University of Northwestern in the Twin Cities area, small private college.
Cool. Awesome. And a little bit, and this may be more than a little bit, but a little bit about your family.
Yeah. So interestingly, I didn't even plan it this way, but I wore my latest Father's Day shirt.
Best dad ever.
And all 7 of my kids, my wife got me these 2 custom t-shirts that actually have that. So I'm married. My wife and I celebrate 15 years this year. And then to our surprise, we have 7 children ages 12 and under. So don't ask me to
t-shirts to get all the names on them or what?
It's actually a real life job aid. That's really what it is, so that I can just look down and be like, wait, which one are you again? Oh, yeah, right.
This is learning tech already. This is wearable tech.
That's exactly it. It's wearable tech. The only thing that's missing from it is their birthdays, which is really the hang up for me.
Yeah. Well, we only have 4 kids, so I will cede the race to you, and you win, and congratulations. So that's awesome.
Well, thank you.
Now, I told folks at the beginning that you're the VP and Chief Learning Officer at ChenMed. Do you mind explaining just a little bit about what the company does, but more broadly, just a kind of a quick picture of your career arc?
Sure. So I'll start with the career arc, and then we'll get to ChenMed. So I originally, way back, if we go in the way back machine, was a total tech head. Everybody thought I was going to be some sort of software engineer or something like that. I had an uncle who was in tech. We were poor, but he would send me these computers all the time. And I was just fascinated with the hardware and programming and all this stuff. And so that's what everybody thought I was going to do. I went off to school and then realized I actually thought computers were really boring. They were very predictable, very kind of rudimentary. And I thought, but I like tech, but I'm really more interested in the intersection of tech and people. And nobody knew what to do with that. So they were like, I don't know, be a teacher then, I guess. And so I did teach in a traditional setting for a while, but quickly realized I'm really interested more in the business side of things. So that's where that whole business technology and the human experience comes in. Very early in my career, I realized I love helping organizations transform their business and people through tech. And so that was my whole career arc. Grew through a number of different organizations. Prior to where I am now, I led learning tech at GE Healthcare.
Hmm.
Kind of one of those like got to that moment and went, now what? Like, what do I really going to do at this point? And then I got a call from ChenMed and they said, would you be interested in being our chief learning officer? And my actual original response was like, no, not really. I kind of am done with the whole corporate organization thing. But they were on a mission to change healthcare in the US for underserved populations. And I went, that is really cool. Sounds really neat. And they were positioned for what they were calling hypergrowth. Now, I did not expect when I started that we would go from 1,200 to over 6,000 in 2.5 years.
Holy moly.
Just a wild ride leading the enterprise strategy for how we think about the development and the growth of our employees in 2023, amidst a pandemic, amidst AI, amidst all these things. So it's been a pretty fun ride.
That's crazy. Wow. 1,200 to 6,000. And super
Yep.
quick, what does ChenMed do exactly?
So they are primary care. So it's primary care for really underserved Medicare Advantage patients in, the inner city, things like that. And so it's really about offering VIP care, which for many of the patients we have is foreign territory. The thought of a company that would provide them high quality critical medical services is just kind of like, what? No, nobody's really ever cared about our well-being. And that is the sole mission of the company, which is awesome.
No, and obviously that sort of echoes or amplifies the point that people you are not looking for another job. In fact, I don't really want to go down the corporate route. Oh, you have a purpose, you have a mission that I can get behind. Oh,
yeah.
So, sir, anybody who's listening to this in talent acquisition and you're looking for rock stars, if you can articulate a purpose, a mission that the rock star can get behind, you can find them. They're out there.
Yep. And they'll make moves that they are not planning on making. But exactly. I think the part I would emphasize, and this was one of the things that was interesting in the journey, is I pushed them outside of their comfort zone. Let's just say that. In that, first of all, I know lots of companies that are like, we really want to rethink and reimagine learning. And then they're like, but can it look exactly like it always has in the past? And I've warned every company I've been at. I'm like, if you just want somebody to come set up a leadership academy or buy you, the latest enterprise learning package, I'm not your guy. And just let's get that clear. And so they really said, I warned them, you're going to be uncomfortable with the things I'm going to push. And you got to be okay with that. I can't be in this bad. And not that it's been just, wild and crazy, because I'm all about meeting people where they are, but I'm like, I'm going to push you beyond your comfort zone. And that happened even before I started, because they said, you need to move to Miami, Florida. We cannot have an executive not here. That's just our whole company. And I'm like, well, lesson one, I will be in Wisconsin and you may never meet me ever. And so they said, all right, well then, you know what, if this is exactly what you said you were going to do, so then let's do it. So, but I think that's something else companies have to take seriously, is you want to pull people in, you may have to get unorthodox in how you think about that.
I hope they get unorthodox. Given 7 kids, I think I may know the answer to my next and last icebreaker question. What do you do in your spare time when you're not at ChenMed?
I actually love when people ask me, what I do. I really say I'm a husband and a dad, and then I talk about my professional life. I am really invested with my family. So I, never imagined having a big family. Wasn't even sure I was going to have kids, type of a thing. And so to me, I'm all in on it. And so, as you can imagine, with 7 kids, going to the grocery store is like planning a trip to Disney. So, when people are like, do you go on vacation? Do you do I'm like, no, I installed the biggest playground that Rainbow makes, and we hang out in the yard. And that's kind of what I do. I have a drone, I fly around that. That's but I love it. I wouldn't change it for the world.
That's cool. And do you mind telling people real quick about your podcast?
Yeah. So I started the podcast almost 4 years ago this year because I saw how I compare the relationship between vendors and practitioners as a middle school dance. You got the boys and the girls sitting on opposite sides of the gym. They both kind of really want to get out there, but they're awkward and uncomfortable and they don't really know what to do. And so I started that podcast as a way to say, I will be the first one to come out on the dance floor and pair people up and have those conversations. And given my background and experience, I really try to demystify this whole space and help build bridges across that so that we can actually just help each other drive better things in our organizations.
Well,
so
thank you for
I can't believe it's been 4 years.
And we're going to talk more about it in a minute, but Learning Tech Talks, highly recommend folks check that out. So on to kind of our topic, since you live at the intersection of tech business and the human experience, which again, good on you for branding. We're always trying to teach our clients how to brand themselves. So again, A++ for that, because I can repeat it. One of the things we talked about in one of our original conversations, we're going to get to AI, but before we get all the way into AI, it's just tech. And this people are afraid of tech and tech companies,
Very much so.
And they don't want to be hustled and sold something and buy something they don't understand and all that kind of, is this part of the genesis of it? You just sort of said it, but with the podcast, but just how would you begin to get people thinking about how to not be afraid of tech? Tech isn't here to hurt you.
So there's two things that come to mind on this. One has nothing to do with the tech. And one is what I found with folks is often the fear that comes is typically rooted in an identity crisis in many ways. If you're uncertain in your identity or what your operation is, then the thought of tech coming and disrupting it is terrifying.
Yes.
Because you don't really quite know what might happen and you're very uncertain of how to think about it and where to apply it and what are the risks and all of this. And so usually one of the first areas that I encourage people on is like, let's get really grounded in what it is you do so that you can have a confidence in this is what we bring to the table. This is how we think about things. These are our operations. And I think with the pace at which work happens, it's really easy for this to slip through people's fingers. And they don't necessarily have that intimate knowledge of, okay, I know things happen in my organization, but honestly, I don't really know how. And so suddenly you're presented with, well, you should really digitally transform that. And that raises this whole uncertainty of, well, I don't really know what that is. And like, I don't really want to tell anybody I don't know what that is. And now I feel like I'm behind because I'm supposed to transform and I don't even know what it is. And so that is usually where I have people start is get to know your operations, get to know the work that's happening, be able to articulate what are those things that you're doing and how and who's involved in that. Because once you have that clear, then the second half is you do need to be familiar to some degree with the technology. But if you're clear on what you're doing, you're already more well positioned to ask the right questions and say, well, but how would this happen? Or how would we go about doing this? Because you can think through the workflows or you can think through the value props and the different aspects of things. And while you may still not understand the language that comes back, well, then that's the second half of the skill gap is saying, okay, you just said a whole bunch of neural networks, artificial intelligence, natural language and you're like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But then you can start asking those questions of, well, but how would it do that? What would be the different ways? What would be the risks that we would need to evaluate? And I think that kind of two-stage approach, which is why I started the show, because I'm familiar with the operations of organizations. And so I can speak to, this is probably how things are working. Here's how this technology fits in the ecosystem. Here's how you may think about it and where you might be able to bolt things in and out and what risks you would need to consider as part of that.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I was at the SHRM conference recently in Las Vegas with 25,000 or whatever it was of my closest HR nerd friends. And Johnny Taylor Jr., the CEO of SHRM, gave a keynote and he was talking about technology. And, he's like, well, first of all, you can wish it to go away. It's not going away. And the pace of change is never going to be slower than it is today. It's only getting faster. And so what he was encouraging people in part was to understand, as an HR executive, you need to be a people expert. Your company's looking to you to be a people expert, a business expert, which I really feel sort of like the first piece that you said, like what's actually happening here? Do we know what's happening here? Do we speak the language of business in the same way that the CEO, the CFO speaks the language of the business? And then lastly, to be cultural experts. And again, you think about the human experience piece of what you said. But for people that are like looking at technology and thinking that technology with a big T is going to solve an undefined problem. But we bought this technology because it was AI. It was something that I felt like we needed to show we were making progress on. But if you don't even know what the problem is or what the value proposition is that you're seeking to see, do you see that with the people that you interact with, that they become enamored with a shiny object versus knowing what they're solving for?
Yes and no. And I say this, sometimes people get frustrated because I always answer with "it depends." And it's because life is way more complex than that. Do people kind of go down that path? Yes, but it's usually with the best intentions of, this is a problem in our organization, and I'm hearing that these are the promises that are being made by this technology. And so with the best intentions, my hope is that by doing this, I'm going to be able to solve the problem. But I think that's where the breakdown of, when you don't understand the technology or the human experience within there, then and this is the really unfortunate part with technology, is going back to what you said, nothing has ever moved faster than it has now, and it's only going to get faster. And so some of these gaps, these problems, these chinks in the armor, they just get exacerbated through this. And that's where you see a lot of people go down the path of digital transformation, and they end up with a bigger mess than they started with. And that just leads to panic, because it's like, wait a minute, I thought this was going to solve a problem. It didn't only not solve the problem, it made the problem worse. And now I don't know what to do about it.
So as you're talking, Christopher, it's making me think about, do we know the problem that we're solving for? If we do, which would be a giant check mark, have we applied the right technological solution for that thing? But then, because we're dealing with people, and your original point was, we're kind of risk averse. That's a survival instinct, is to be risk averse. Where does change management like I'm solving the right problem with the right tech, but I've got a giant change management issue?
Well, and this goes back to something that I mentioned earlier, which is, when you're dealing with people, going back to why I was so fascinated with it, you look at people and you go, all right, 1 + 1 = 2. And then you look at someone else and you go, 1 + 1 = 7. Like, what just happened right now? Type of a thing. The math doesn't add up. And it goes back to this fact that there is no such thing as just a technology or a business change, because at the end of the day, in every organization, those technology and business changes run on people.
Yes.
And so when you don't factor that X factor in, you're throwing an ingredient into your cake mix that it may make the cake rise, it may make it explode in the oven, type of a thing. And that's where, especially with technology, you're dealing with people's identity. And as much as people, I wrote a post about this last week, as much as people hate a lot of the activity they do at work, when you go to take that from them and say, hey, this is great, this is solving a problem, you're not going to have to do that anymore. That can inadvertently be messaged as, what you do doesn't matter here anymore. And that's an identity crisis that can send people running for the hills. And that's where you see resistance and people holding on to things that you go, but you hate doing that. Why are you defending it with your life? Because if I don't have this, then I have nothing, and the company sees me as no longer value. And I think that's going back to, like, why is the change management part so important? It's that very thing that I'm talking about right now.
Okay, now that, which totally makes sense. One of the things that relatedly then that we had talked about is that it may be okay sometimes for organizations to be smaller. It may create a permanent change, Now, a lot of this, we'll talk a lot about upskilling, cross training, things that hey, that boring thing or that thing that was driving you nuts, like here's a new thing that you can do that adds value that technology doesn't do yet, or the marriage of AI plus human intelligence. So like you still need people to do what only people can do. Um, how do you help that employee think about, hey, this isn't necessarily going to replace you. It might redefine what you're doing,
Yeah.
but how would you help somebody think about
So,
that?
so I think there's a couple angles that I tend to approach it. So first of all, it's one, working with the business leaders to recognize when it comes to business, you're not in a zero sum game. And I
Mm,
think that's one of the biggest things that you have to tackle, because a lot of organizations are looking at it going, well, here's all we have. And if AI is taking some of that, then we obviously need
yeah.
less. And it's like, no, that's the mindset of a zero sum game, that there's only so much that you can work with. And what's interesting about this is that's actually not the case. Like, you look, I was watching a thing and looking into some research the other day that showed the GDP growth despite population growth and all this
Mhm.
stuff. And you look at it, it's like we make more with less, which just defies the odds. And I think first, as senior leaders looking at that, going, okay, hey, maybe we think about this and what other opportunities are we not exploring because of resource constraints, financial
Yes.
constraints, things like this? How might we be able to do more with what we have that we historically have just not been able to do? Because I think that changes the conversation from, well, we're going to be doing less. So how do we downsize the organization? And you might go, wow, what business opportunities may we be able to step into now that we couldn't before, where now these resources can be repurposed for that? And I saw that happen in COVID all over, where businesses went, we got to totally rethink our model. And they ended up growing, which you go, well, that doesn't add up in math. It's like, and there goes the human experience piece. But I think then for the individual, what can be really helpful is actually getting down to the core of it, of what is it that really makes you tick and brings you to life in this kind of stuff. Because when you can start to get into that, and I do that with my own team all the time, because people get into L&D and they go, I like learning. Like, what does that mean? Like, what do you actually like? Because learning is a business ecosystem in and of itself.
Mm.
So what are the things that you really enjoy, the types of problems you like to solve? What are the areas you like to lean in? Because when you can start getting into that, then when technology comes, you can quickly go, well, maybe I'm not doing this anymore, but now I'm doing this, still ticking the same boxes, but in a wildly different way. And a good example of this in learning is AI is coming for content creation like a wrecking ball. I
Amen.
mean, I was toying around with an app the other day that with a basic prompt, it'll write a full script, create a full audio animation, and create the video that goes along with it in seconds. So if you're a designer and all you do is create video, you might look at this and go, like, what purpose do I add? But it's like, well, but is really the value you add coming up with the best scripts? I don't think so. And I think that's where you really start helping people understand what is it that you actually do well. You can start to reimagine those possibilities really quickly, which then you realize my identity is not rooted in putting pivot tables in Excel that an AI algorithm can do 10 times better and faster than I
Yes.
can. You realize what really it is that you do.
Well, and so thinking about retention of employees, like why do people leave? One of the reasons that people frequently state is I'm just stagnating, like I'm not growing in my career, they're not invested in me, I'm not developing as a professional, and so I'm going to move on where I can have an opportunity to do that. Well, guess what? You don't need to move on. AI is going to help move you all, not move you on, but move you along, right? So that you can continue to do things that are interesting, add value to the business. I mean, you said content creation, so it's still like outing yourself, and I don't know why I'm even phrasing it like that, but using ChatGPT to help us with some of the post creation that we do, like it just massively can stream. I can take an audio file, drop it into a transcription program, drop that into Chat GPT and say, give me the five, primary themes of this
Yep.
conversation. And like all that's done in 30 seconds. Now what can we do instead of spending 3 hours just trying to sift through all of that?
Right.
Now
And
that,
that's just it. That's a perfect example, because the same thing with Learning Tech Talks. It's a podcast I run by myself. I have 7 kids and a full-time job. There's a limitation on how much I can really do with the podcast. And so there's a lot of things I knew that I would have liked to do, but I just went, I literally don't have the capacity to go back and do it. And I don't have the money, because I'm doing it for free, to go hire someone to do all this stuff. So for me, I look at these AI tools and go, wow, like I can actually analyze the full transcript of my conversation and pick out some things that I still remember. And I can go, no, that's actually a really bad, like we're not going to use that. But then the other ones where I go, no, that's actually gold that I would have totally forgotten about. How do I drill that out and make that into other things? And I think that's where it's going back to it's not a zero sum game.
yes.
There are things that you're not doing that you wish you could, that you can't, because you're constrained. And this is unthrottling those constraints.
No, what a great word. That's a great book title, Unthrottle. Because, I mean, for people that are listening, and this is not an HR limited conversation. This is
It's
anybody
not.
that's leading some part of the business, or if you're just the worker in the business. But when AI can free up capacity to go do other things that only people can do, right now, then go lean into those things and find new ways to add value. And oh, by the way, things that are more interesting to you. And I love how you say it is not a zero sum game, because that assumes
Not.
that the pie isn't constantly changing and in reality expanding. The
Yep.
pie is expanding all the time. This is an abundance mentality, not a scarcity mentality. And if you can embrace the abundance of opportunity, not the scarcity of this one functional task oriented thing might be going away, it's a radical mind shift to take mentally.
Yeah. And I think the two things to people who would listen to that, who I see lots of dissenting voices on this. And actually, if you were to look at my YouTube channel, you'll see I have some very cautiously optimistic statements out there as well, because there are two things that anybody listening to this needs to consider. First of all, one, you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that is just not always fun. I think about when I got back into fitness, it was miserable. I mean, it was miserable. I was sore, and this was not a fun time to go through, but it was worth it. And I think that's one of the things where there's these promises of, oh, it'll be just sunshine and puppies all the time. And it's like, no, you're going to be really sore and miserable and frustrated, and you're going to be challenged. And, if you just want to sit back and do nothing, that's not going to go well for you. But I think the other thing is, just like you can create so much opportunity and do all this other stuff, and this is why I'm so passionate about helping people understand the tech, is you can also do some unintentionally nefarious things in an organization if you're not careful. And I think that's where I am already trying to caution people to tread carefully, because you can do irreversible damage if you're not careful and thoughtful, and if you don't understand what you're doing, and if you haven't thought that through. And that doesn't mean have analysis paralysis, but you do need to think carefully about what you're doing, because it's not, utopia on the other side. There is some real risk.
Yep. So let me ask you this, just as the L&D tech guy for a second, just
Sure.
what are the 2 or 3, and I don't mean brands or vendors exactly, but
Yeah.
more like categories. What are sort of the tech innovations that have you the most excited, and why?
So a couple things. So one, I'll just focus on kind of adaptive, which really ties to personalization. Historically, when you look at people's learning trajectories, and this isn't a knock on how we've had to do it, there just really weren't better ways to do it. There's a reason an individual coach is more effective than going through a class. It's like, well, because somebody gets to know you, they understand your needs, they're able to adapt and pivot and change your pathway based on your dynamic experience and where you are. That has historically been held for the elite, the very few, the selective. It just was not available to the masses. Where the tech market is now going, we truly can get to know an individual cognitively, emotionally, developmentally, and actually be able to say, this is what the right path for you looks like, versus this is the path we have. Honestly, whether it works for you or not, we did our best to try and address everybody's needs. But as a result, we made it so generic. It honestly probably sucks for everybody. But hey, we did it. And I think that's what's fantastic is we can actually say, no, you know what? Bob's development looks vastly different than Christopher's and can provide that individualized experience that was never possible or scalable. Going back to the zero-sum game, it was just one of those, like, this is opportunity that did not exist 10, 15 years ago. So I'm extremely excited about that. Something else I'm extremely excited about, which, is met with mixed reviews, is we're able to give people experiences, legitimate experiences. And I would still say we're still early on in this, but when I look at the immersive tech space, we can now actually put people in environments and situations where they can learn and actually that they couldn't before. And I mean, I was experimenting with this years ago where we were actually putting people in like cultural contexts to learn things that you can't teach in a classroom. And it's far too expensive to put someone on or unsafe to put them in different places. And I know sometimes immediately jump to like, oh, like you mean training airplane pilots how to fly? Well, yeah, but that's not new. But I'm talking about, what if you could teach your employee, like for our company, what if you could teach our employees what the patient experience was really like if you were the patient? And immersive tech can now do that. And we still have a ways to go, but you look at that and go, that's not something we used to be able to do, to teach people through practice and action in the context in which they would actually be doing it in a safe way, where when they need to hit the emergency button, they aren't causing real damage to themselves or to others. I mean, that is extremely amazing. And that's not just for adult learners. You think about the possibilities for kids growing up type of a thing. So I think there's that. I think the third one, and then I'll quit because I could probably literally talk about this for the better part of a day. But a third summary one was, it's historically the amount of time people spend at work simply trying to find things or figure out how to do things that is wasted time and energy, that we can now say, I look at digital adoption technology, or I look at, where generative AI is going, and the ability to be able to say, we have all this information in our company. How on earth can people even get to it when they need it? And when they need it? Because the usual response is, something went wrong, let's just train everybody. Well, we know it doesn't work, and it's an awful experience for people, but what did we have in the past? And now we can say, hey, I know Bob is about to do this thing, and this is something that's really important that he knows right as he does that. So let's make sure he has that information and we remind him of it. And if he misses it, let's also point that out so that he can actually redirect his actions moving forward. I mean, I see this in some of the stuff that's happening in meeting tools that can now even say things like, you're talking too much, Christopher, tone it down, or you're only talking to this person in the meeting. This is not a meeting of belonging, because this is a conversation. I mean, that kind of performance support and real-time enablement didn't exist, 10 years ago.
Wow, that emotional intelligence coaching basically in the moment, that's wild.
Yes.
You were this idea that there's too much information, like where to go find the answer, particularly and I know that this is squishy and not all in the same place for any two companies, but remote work, hybrid work, well, as much as I don't want to go to a fixed office location, I totally understand some of the benefits of doing that. To be able to peek over the cubicle and say, Christopher, like, do you know how to do this? Or, hey, like, I just took a call from a client. What's the answer to their hard question that I don't know the answer to yet? Well, when I don't have the opportunity to peek around the cubicle and ask you that, you can't necessarily slack your way to greatness. So if, what the precursor, I guess, to AI was big data. Right? Everybody's talking
Yep.
about big data and wrangling big data and the analytics on big data. And AI just like takes something that was squared and cubes it and just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But 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 it's that kind of a thing of being able to actually not just where do I find the data? What's the answer? Just tell all I need is I don't actually need more data. I just need the answer.
Yes.
And AI is
Yep.
perfect for that.
Yep. And I
But
think that
what
again goes back to differentiating between development and enablement. There are some things that
hmm,
and this goes back to even skills. I have lots of conversations right now on what skills are actually a giant waste of time for companies to invest in. Because the reality is people don't need those skills because those skills are going to disappear before you can even
yes.
develop them in your organization. So what are the durable skills underneath those? So that, yeah, they can quickly figure out what they need to know and get the answers to it. But then once it erodes, you go, it's fine because what we built was we built ourselves on the bedrock.
Couple quick questions. Is there
Sure.
technology that you think is being overhyped or is even potentially dangerous?
Um, oh, well, yes. Going back to the risk conversation. I mean, look, so let's take immersive tech. Again, this is a rabbit hole that we could go down for too far. But let's take immersive tech. We fundamentally today are very poor in terms of understanding human experience and the emotional implications and all this stuff. Throwing things at people and going, hey, now we can just put you wherever you want. We still don't know what that could mean. And so I see some of this stuff that gets overhyped. You see the Apple Vision Pro commercials where people, this one just made me sick in the thing where the dad's sitting with his kids with his Apple Vision Pro on, taking pictures while he's in. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, when I'm sitting with my kids, I should not be in my Apple Vision Pro taking pictures of my kid. Like, be with your damn kids type of a thing. So I see some of this going like, whew. And then I also see AI where I go, we're making these promises of whatever you want, you can have. You
Hmm.
want to create a video of this, you can do it. You want something that creates this for you, you can do it. I have seen too much of human history to know just giving people what they want is like diet soda. It's potentially carcinogen, like it's potentially cancerous, and it's certainly not going to satisfy you. And the fallout of that to me is one of those risks that I'm like, we need to be really careful about this because I don't necessarily believe, no, actually, I adamantly don't believe what people need is just limitless bounties of whatever they want when they want it. I think that is extremely dangerous. And that's the promise that we're making. And I think we need to be careful.
No, it's a fair point. And ironically, I mean, you see the people that helped invent AI going, we need to slow down here a little bit, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. When the godfather of AI steps away from his career and goes, I'm on a campaign, not to say shut this down, but to say, hang on a second. Before we
yes.
create a monster we can't put down, can we think carefully about what we're doing? And I think that is wise words that we should all be listening to.
Okay, so I'm going to set up my question in an ironic way. When I do these interviews with a lot of executives, I'll often end them by, what qualities do you most look for when you're building a team, you're looking to promote somebody? I think there's kind of two sides of the same coin where they say natural curiosity is very high and learning agility. And Steve Cadigan, LinkedIn's first CHRO, and he wrote a book called Workquake. So that's really the superpower, for this post-pandemic world. And this is really before AI, because AI has only been kind of on our radar really since November of last year. So, and he wrote the book a full year and a half before that. But basically, like learning agility is the superpower. What do you say to a CEO or a CFO who doesn't see investing in L&D as strategic? that it's potentially a waste of money. All I'm going to do is train the best people. They're going to leave, or whatever the other major objections would be.
So I think my success in these conversations has come from not talking about learning and development. I don't have that conversation because I know that that's where it automatically goes. Is this just concern around, well, why would we invest this kind of money in type of a thing? I really have found that talking about the challenges that the organization is facing and how people really are the key to this. So how are we going to get the people to help solve these challenges? I honestly, I hear some of the conversations from my peers. I'm having such a hard time getting our CFO to be on board with this, or our COO doesn't get it. And I'm like, well, what is the conversation you're having? Because I don't run into those same challenges and haven't in my entire career. Now, that doesn't mean that whatever Christopher's wanted, I always get. That's not the case. But historically, whenever I run into those barriers, I have to take a hard look in the mirror and go, how did I represent this? Because did I represent this how I think? Or did I actually get in their shoes and say, what are you losing sleep over? And how can this be the key to solving that problem? Because once you get there, and to me, it's just a translation issue. Half the time, I mean, I've been thrown out of boardrooms. I've been thrown out of conference rooms where it's like, absolutely not. And then I go, okay, well, that's odd because here, this is a problem you're telling me about. And then I realize, nope, it's the way I represented it. I didn't come from the point of view of them.
Yeah. So I think that's so interesting for me that, A goes back to what's the problem we're trying to solve. Johnny Taylor talking about, we need to be business experts. We need to speak the language of business. What I think was kind of between the lines of what you were saying is, you're not selling this program. Hey, we need to invest in this. Well, dude, I don't need any more programs. Like that's not on my. It's not on my balance sheet income statement, right? Or statement of owner's equity. So I don't really have that problem. I've got a market share problem. I've got an innovation problem. I've got a profitability problem. I've got an international expansion problem. We have a lot of problems. A new L&D program isn't on that list. And so it's like, back to where you were, and you can continue to, kind of pine for a seat at the table. But the reason you don't have a seat at the table is you're not speaking the language of the people at the table.
They're like, what? I didn't come to you telling you I need another leadership program. And here's the other thing. And this is the part that sometimes won't make you popular. A lot of times it won't make you popular, but it's needed. Is I get it because I'm there too myself sometimes. Sometimes we're so busy running that we don't take the time to stop and go, wait a minute, like, what are we running towards and why are we running that way? The book I wrote is Relentless Intention, because one of the key secrets that I found to help people with this is so often they have not actually drilled back into, like, what are we really trying to do and why? And that can be a reactionary thing where you may get a message from a business leader going, and they may even frame it up in a way you go, haha, our moment. I need training on this. And you go, sweet, like, let's go do it. And then you go back and they're like, yeah, never mind. I don't have time for that kind of, and you go, what just happened? And it's because you didn't take the time to go, wait, what was underneath that? Because everyone was just moving so fast. And if you can dig past that, you find these durable things that they don't sway in the tides. They don't get blown by the winds like so many of these other things do.
Yeah. So last little topic here, almost maybe it's the second to last topic. One of the realities is technology will displace some people.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, there's just some jobs that,
at least from what they're doing now. Yes.
Let's just pick on content creation for a minute. Let's just say that some jobs in content creation are going to go away for whatever reason. You and I had talked, kind of in one of our previous conversations about, managing to the exception, not to the norm. And when people do need to go, that there's a level of respect and dignity. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, over the years, I have let people go. I've done reorgs where parts of my organization no longer needed to be there, type of a thing. But at the core of it all, and I think what has kept, that genuinely and generally a positive experience is the dignity and respect and remembering that at the other end of that, there is a human being, a person that has a family, that has emotions, that has an identity, and you can't treat that like it doesn't matter. And so, actually taking the time to say, every single person on this team matters, and we're going to consider that. And obviously, you got to do it within reason, but there are ways that you can have that conversation and go down that path. And honestly, I found if I were to calculate it, it has probably been very rare exceptions where I've had someone that just, they didn't see it, they wouldn't accept it, and it's just been, I would say 99% of the time, it's been met with appreciation and dignity and a transition into something else, either internally or externally. And sometimes those people have ended up being boomerang employees. They've left, and I've ended up hiring them back because a new opportunity came up, and they were so appreciative of the dignity and respect they were shown. Either they came back, or they're the ones that sent me the people that ended up being my rock stars, because they were like, I know what you needed, and I know that wasn't for me, but I know this person, and they are crushing it, and they'd be great for your team. And you're like, the person I just let go is the person referring candidates in, and that matters a lot.
Particularly in a social media world. I mean, Glassdoor is not a secret. So, last question. If you were to go back and give advice to 20-year-old Christopher, and I know that's only been a couple of years, but if you were to go back and do that, what advice would you give him? Career advice.
Oh man. See, this is one's a tough one for me, because I was asked recently, like, do you have any regrets? And I'm like, no, I don't, because my whole life has been a learning experience. So if I could go back and give myself advice, I actually think it took me longer than I wish it had to realize how critical other people were. And not that they didn't matter, but that it was just more, I kind of had this rugged independence American Western culture that it's just like, I can do this on my own, and I don't need anybody, and I'll figure it out type of a thing, and I'm invincible. And maybe everybody does in their 20s, because you're stupid and you've got an ego the size of Montana. But I wish I could have gone back and gone, you're not as smart as you think you are. You're not as talented as you think you are. And you need people a lot more than you think you do. So don't forget that, because you may end up making a lot of mistakes and creating a lot of hardship for yourself that you could avoid if you just recognized that you desperately need other people, and you need a heavy dose of humility. That's probably what I would say.
Part of what resonates with me, well, all of that resonates with me, and is, sometimes it's the, I'm awesome, but I wonder if that awesome declaration is really insecurity of like, I have to take all the credit because I'm trying to create an identity for myself, and I need to soak in all the credit for this to build up my equity account in my mind, that I actually know what the crap I'm doing, right? So if I give Christopher credit for this, well, that's good for him and not for me. And
goes back to the zero-sum game thing. If I'm giving someone else the credit, that's less credit than I'm getting, and it's like, no, right. Actually not true.
Yeah, and then what you get is that scarcity and abundance mentality, and the reality is opportunity is abundance, and we're so often we're just afraid of loss. And again, it's a very natural thing. So it's like not fault finding; it's the way that we're wired. It helps us live in one sense, but at the same time, it prevents us from living because we're worried.
Well, and I grew up Mo Gaudat said this, and I related to it because I grew up in a funeral home. And the thing he said that is a red thread in my life that just sticks out is he said, living is dying, and then before you die. Like, living is dying before you die. And to me, that was one of those, there's so much truth in that, when you can actually die to the things of this world and go, I don't need to be tied up in this, and you actually can begin living. And it's spot on.
I don't know how to do better than that. So, Christopher, I look forward to many more forward conversations with you. Would really encourage folks to listen to and subscribe to your podcast. If they want to go find that, what's the best way to do that?
I mean, it's on all the whatever favorite podcast thing you like. If you like listening to it, I do go live on LinkedIn with mine. So I have a lot of people that follow me on LinkedIn because then they can actually participate in the conversation. And then this year, I kind of committed to growing my YouTube presence. So those really are the big areas that people
So
can find me.
Learning Tech Talks with
Yep.
Christopher Lind. Awesome.
Yep.
Well, Christopher, this is a great friendship. I'm glad we started. I appreciate everything that you had to share with us today. Wish you much success, and just appreciate how you're evangelizing for this intersection of people, business, tech. It's all in this soup that needs to work, and you're helping people make the most out of it. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Bless you guys. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and look forward to seeing you next time.
I know